Sarah Mitchell walked through the main gate of Fort Henderson Military Base, carrying an old rusted ammunition box that had seen better days. The metal container was dented and weathered, its original olive-green paint chipped away to reveal patches of brown rust underneath. She clutched it tightly against her chest as she made her way toward the recruitment office. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground as young recruits ran their daily drills. Sarah watched them for a moment, remembering her own days of basic training many years ago, but those memories seemed like a lifetime away now. At 42, she felt the weight of time and the skeptical glances from the soldiers around her. "Ma'am, are you lost?" asked a young private who couldn't have been more than 20. His tone was polite but carried the underlying assumption that she didn't belong here. "I'm here to see Colonel Martinez about the sniper instructor position," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. The private's eyes moved to the rusty box in her arms, and she caught the slight smirk that crossed his face before he quickly masked it with professional courtesy. "Right this way, ma'am." As they walked across the base, Sarah noticed more stares and whispered comments. She heard fragments of conversations as they passed groups of soldiers. "Isn't that the woman applying for the sniper job? What's with that old box? Looks like something from a garage sale. Think she's ever even held a rifle before?" Sarah kept her eyes forward, though each comment stung. She had expected this reaction, but it didn't make it any easier to bear. The military had changed since her time, but apparently, some attitudes remained the same. The private led her to a modern building with glass doors and marble floors. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs of distinguished officers and commendation plaques. Sarah felt small and out of place among all the polished surfaces and formal displays. "Colonel Martinez will see you shortly," the private said, gesturing toward a row of chairs outside the colonel's office. "You can wait here." Sarah sat down carefully, still holding her precious box. Through the glass walls, she could see other applicants for various positions. They all looked younger, fitter, and more confident than she felt. Most carried professional portfolios in leather cases or manila folders thick with documents. A group of 3 male soldiers sat across from her, occasionally glancing her way and exchanging knowing looks. One of them, a sergeant based on his stripes, leaned forward slightly. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said with false politeness. "Are you here about the cleaning position? I think that office is down the hall." His companions chuckled quietly. Sarah felt her cheeks burn but kept her composure. "No, I'm here about the sniper instructor position." The laughter was less subtle this time. The sergeant shook his head with amusement. "Right, of course. And I suppose all your qualifications are in that antique you're carrying?" Sarah looked down at the rusted ammunition box. She understood why they found it amusing. It did look completely out of place in this polished environment. But they had no idea what it represented or what was inside. "Something like that," she said quietly. The waiting area fell into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the soft clicking of keyboards from nearby offices. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to center herself, thinking about why she was here and what she hoped to accomplish. Years ago, when she had left the military, she thought that chapter of her life was closed forever. She had tried to build a normal civilian life, working various jobs and attempting to forget the skills that had once defined her. But after her husband's death 2 years ago, she found herself lost and searching for purpose again. When she saw the job posting for a sniper instructor position, something inside her had awakened. It wasn't just about the job or the money. It was about returning to the one thing she had truly excelled at, the one place where she had felt she truly belonged. The office door opened, and Colonel Martinez emerged. He was a tall, imposing man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that had seen many years of service. Sarah stood up immediately, straightening her shoulders. "Ms. Mitchell?" he asked, extending his hand. "I'm Colonel Martinez. Thank you for coming in today." As they shook hands, Sarah noticed his eyes briefly glance at the ammunition box. But unlike the others, there was no judgment in his expression, only curiosity. "Please come into my office," he said, stepping aside to let her pass. The snickering from the waiting area followed them until the door closed behind them. Colonel Martinez gestured to a chair across from his desk, and Sarah sat down, placing the rusted box carefully on her lap. The colonel's office was impressive but lived in. Awards and commendations covered one wall, while family photos occupied his desk. Maps and operational charts hung on another wall marked with pins and notes from various missions. "I have to admit, Ms. Mitchell, your resume is quite unusual," Colonel Martinez said, settling into his chair. It's been almost 15 years since you left active duty, and you've been working in completely different fields since then. Sarah nodded. I understand your concerns, sir. I know how it looks. Tell me, the colonel continued, leaning back in his chair. What makes you think you're qualified to train our next generation of military snipers? The position requires not just skill but current knowledge of tactics, equipment, and training methods. Before Sarah could answer, there was a knock at the door. The same sergeant from the waiting area poked his head in. Sorry to interrupt, Colonel, but I wanted to mention that my interview is scheduled for right after this. I just wanted to confirm the time. Colonel Martinez nodded politely. Yes, Sergeant Williams, will be done shortly. The sergeant's eyes fell on Sarah and her ammunition box again. Good luck with your interview, ma'am, he said with barely concealed amusement before closing the door. Sarah took a deep breath. This was her moment. Everything depended on the next few minutes and what was inside the weathered box that everyone found so amusing. Sarah looked directly into Colonel Martinez's eyes, her hands resting on the old ammunition box. Sir, I know what everyone thinks when they see me. A middle-aged woman carrying what looks like junk from someone's attic. I heard the comments in the hallway, saw the looks in the waiting room. The colonel remained silent, his expression neutral but attentive. Sarah appreciated that he was giving her the chance to speak without interruption. 15 years ago, when I left the military, I thought I was done with this life forever. I got married, tried to have a normal civilian career, worked in offices, retail stores, even drove a school bus for 3 years. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. But 2 years ago, my husband died in a car accident, and I found myself questioning everything I had become. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Through the office window, she could see young soldiers practicing their drills on the parade ground. Their movements were precise, disciplined, purposeful. She envied their certainty. I spent months going through our things, trying to figure out what to do next. That's when I found this box in our basement storage room. Sarah's fingers traced the rusted edges of the container. I had hidden it away so well that I had almost forgotten it existed. Colonel Martinez leaned forward slightly, his interest clearly piqued. What's in the box, Ms. Mitchell? My past, sir. The part of me I tried to leave behind but could never really escape. Sarah's voice carried a mixture of sadness and pride. You see, Colonel, before I became Sarah Mitchell, the civilian, I was Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen, United States Army. The colonel's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of her previous rank and the different surname. Chen? My maiden name, sir. I took my husband's name when we married, started fresh. But Staff Sergeant Chen had a very different life than Sarah Mitchell ever did. Outside the office, Sarah could hear the murmur of voices as more applicants arrived for their interviews. She wondered if they were all getting the same skeptical reception she had received, or if her age and appearance made her a special target for doubt. In my final 3 years of active duty, I was assigned to some very classified operations, Sarah continued. The kind that don't appear on public records, where success is measured not by medals or recognition, but by missions completed and lives saved. Colonel Martinez's posture straightened. As a career military man, he understood the weight of what Sarah was implying. Classified operations meant serious business, the kind of assignments that only went to soldiers with exceptional skills and proven reliability. I spent those 3 years in places that officially don't exist, doing things that never happened, working with teams whose names are still classified. Sarah's voice dropped to almost a whisper, and I was very, very good at what I did. She looked down at the ammunition box again, remembering the weight of the rifle in her hands, the feeling of complete focus that came with lining up a shot, the satisfaction of knowing she had protected her team and completed her mission. When I left the military, I was required to turn in all my official documents and records. Everything that proved what I had accomplished had to stay behind. That's standard procedure for anyone who worked in classified operations. The colonel nodded, understanding the security protocols involved. But you kept something. I kept what I was allowed to keep. Personal items, mementos, things that wouldn't compromise security but still held meaning for me. Sarah's grip tightened on the box. At the time, I thought I would never need them again. I was wrong. Through the glass walls of the office, Sarah could see Sergeant Williams pacing in the waiting area, occasionally glancing their way. His earlier confidence seemed to be wavering as the interview ran longer than he had apparently expected. Colonel Martinez, I know I look like someone who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. I know that rusty old box looks like something that belongs in a trash can, but appearances can be deceiving. She set the ammunition box on the colonel's desk, her hands steady despite the nervousness she felt inside. 15 years ago, I walked away from a career that defined me because I thought I wanted a different life. I thought I wanted to be normal, to fit in with people who had never seen combat, never had to make life and death decisions in a split second. And did you? Find what you were looking for in civilian life? Sarah considered the question carefully. For a while, yes. My husband was a good man and we had some happy years together. But after he died, I realized something important. You can leave the military, but if it's truly part of who you are, it never really leaves you. She gestured toward the window where the young recruits were still training. Those soldiers out there, they're preparing for a world that's becoming more dangerous every day. They need instructors who don't just understand the theory of what they're learning, but who have lived it, who have been tested under real conditions. Colonel Martinez studied her face, looking for signs of bravado or false confidence. What he saw instead was quiet determination and a deep sadness that spoke of real loss and genuine experience. The sniper instructor position isn't just about teaching marksmanship, Ms. Mitchell. It's about preparing young men and women for situations where one shot can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure, between their squad coming home safely or not coming home at all. I understand that completely, sir, better than most people could. The colonel stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the training exercises. We've had several applicants for this position. All of them have impressive recent records, current certifications, and modern training experience. Sarah felt her heart sink. She had expected this, but hearing it stated so plainly still hurt. But, the colonel continued, turning back to face her, none of them have walked into my office carrying a mystery that's kept my attention for this long. So I'm going to ask you directly, Ms. Mitchell, what's in that box and why should it change my mind about hiring you? Sarah looked at the rusted ammunition container sitting on the colonel's polished desk. Everything she had worked toward, everything she hoped to accomplish came down to this moment. Sarah's fingers moved to the latches of the old ammunition box. The metal clips were stiff with age and rust, but they still worked. As she opened the lid, the hinges creaked softly, breaking the silence that had settled over the colonel's office. Before I show you what's inside, Colonel, I need you to understand something, Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Everything in this box represents a part of my life that I've never talked about with anyone, not even my late husband. He knew I had served, but he never knew the details. Colonel Martinez returned to his seat, his full attention focused on Sarah and the weathered container. The afternoon light streaming through the window cast shadows across his desk, making the moment feel almost ceremonial. Sarah carefully lifted out the first item, a faded photograph showing a group of soldiers in desert camouflage standing beside a military vehicle. The image was slightly creased and worn from years of careful handling. This was taken in Afghanistan 2008, Sarah explained, pointing to a figure in the photo. That's me, third from the left. We were part of a joint task force conducting reconnaissance missions in some of the most dangerous territory in the region. The colonel studied the photograph closely. The woman in the image was clearly younger, leaner, with the focused expression of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. Even in the faded photo, he could see the confidence and alertness that marked an experienced soldier. The mission lasted 8 months, Sarah continued, setting the photo aside and reaching for the next item. During that time, our team was responsible for providing overwatch and precision support for dozens of operations. She pulled out a small, weathered notebook filled with her handwriting. The pages were yellowed with age, and some entries were written in what appeared to be coded language. This is my field journal from that deployment. Every shot, every mission, every lesson learned is documented in here. Sarah opened the notebook to a random page, revealing neat columns of numbers, coordinates, and abbreviated notes. Range calculations, wind speed adjustments, target confirmations. The kind of details that you can't learn in a classroom. Colonel Martinez recognized the format immediately. Field journals like this one were kept by soldiers who took their craft seriously, who understood that success in combat often came down to preparation and attention to the smallest details. But that's not what makes this box special, Sarah said, reaching deeper into the container. These are. She withdrew a stack of certificates and documents protected by plastic sleeves despite their age. The papers looked official, bearing multiple seals and signatures. Colonel Martinez could see they were military documents, but he couldn't read the details from his position. Sniper School Graduation Certificate, Sarah said, laying the first document on the desk. Advanced Marksmanship Instructor Certification. Combat Accuracy Awards. She continued placing certificates on the desk, each one representing hours of training, testing, and proven performance. The colonel leaned forward to examine the documents more closely. These weren't the standard certificates that every qualified soldier received. These were specialized commendations, the kind earned by soldiers who operated at the highest levels of their field. Distinguished Marksman Award, he read aloud from one of the certificates. Exceptional service in combat operations. His voice carried a note of growing respect as he continued reading. Long-range precision engagement specialist. Sarah nodded, pulling out more documents. The Army trained me for 3 years before that deployment I mentioned. I attended every advanced course available, worked with some of the best instructors in the world, and then I spent 2 years proving what I had learned in real combat situations. She reached into the box one more time and withdrew what appeared to be a small, leather-bound logbook. Unlike the field journal, this book looked more official, with confidential stamped on its cover in faded red letters. This is my confirmed engagement log, Sarah said quietly, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Every target engaged, every shot taken in combat, recorded and verified by my commanding officers. Colonel Martinez understood immediately what he was looking at. Confirmed engagement logs were kept only by snipers who had seen active combat, and they represented the most serious aspect of a sniper's service record. These documents contained proof of not just skill, but of performance under the ultimate pressure. How many? He asked simply. Sarah met his eyes directly. 43 confirmed engagements over 2 deployments. Every one of them prevented loss of American or Allied lives. Every shot was necessary, justified, and recorded according to military protocol. The office fell silent except for the soft sound of air conditioning and distant voices from the hallway. Colonel Martinez looked at the array of documents spread across his desk, then back at the woman who had carried them in a rusted ammunition box that everyone had mocked. Why keep all of this hidden for 15 years? He asked. These credentials would have opened doors for you in law enforcement, private security, training facilities. Sarah carefully gathered the certificates back into their protective sleeves. Because every time I looked at these documents, I remembered not just the successes, but the weight of what they represented. 43 people who didn't go home to their families because of decisions I made. They were the right decisions, necessary decisions, but they still had consequences. She paused, looking down at her hands. I thought if I put this all away and became someone completely different, I could leave that weight behind. I learned that some things follow you no matter how far you run. Through the office window, they could see Sergeant Williams still waiting, checking his watch repeatedly. His earlier confidence had clearly been shaken by the length of Sarah's interview. After my husband died, I realized something important, Sarah continued. Placing the documents back in the ammunition box, I had been trying to deny a part of myself that was fundamental to who I am. These skills, this experience, this knowledge, they're not just career credentials. They're part of my identity. Colonel Martinez stood up and walked around his desk, studying Sarah with new eyes. The middle-aged woman who had walked into his office carrying what appeared to be junk had just revealed herself to be one of the most qualified sniper instructors he had ever encountered. Ms. Mitchell, or should I say Staff Sergeant Chen, these are extraordinary qualifications. But I have to ask, can you still perform at this level after 15 years away from active duty? Sarah closed the ammunition box carefully, her hand steady despite the importance of the colonel's question. She had expected this challenge and had been preparing for it mentally, ever since she had decided to apply for the position. Colonel, that's a fair question, and I'm not going to pretend that 15 years haven't passed. I'm not the same soldier I was in 2009. Sarah stood up, matching the colonel's posture. But some skills once truly mastered don't disappear completely. They may get rusty, but the foundation remains solid. She walked to the window and looked out at the training ground where a new group of recruits was practicing basic rifle techniques. Their movements were awkward, uncertain, lacking the fluid precision that came only with experience. 6 months ago, after I decided to pursue this path, I started visiting a civilian shooting range about an hour from my home. I told the owner that I was thinking about getting back into competitive shooting after many years away. Colonel Martinez remained silent, letting her continue at her own pace. The first day was humbling. Sarah admitted with a slight smile. My groupings were scattered, my timing was off, and I felt like a complete beginner. But muscle memory is a remarkable thing. Within a week, the fundamentals started coming back. Within a month, I was consistently hitting targets at 500 yards. She turned back to face the colonel. But that's just the mechanical aspect. The real question is whether I can still think like a sniper, whether I can still make the calculations, read the conditions, and maintain the mental discipline required for precision shooting. Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small, modern notebook. Unlike the weathered field journal from the ammunition box, this one was new, filled with fresh entries. For the past 3 months, I've been keeping a new field journal. Weather conditions, target distances, shot groupings, areas for improvement. I've been treating this preparation like a deployment, approaching it with the same seriousness I once brought to combat operations. She handed the notebook to Colonel Martinez. He flipped through the pages, noting the detailed entries, precise sketches, and careful documentation of progress. The handwriting was the same as in the old journal, but the dates were recent, showing consistent practice over several months. Last month, I attended a long-range shooting competition in Colorado. Sarah continued. I didn't enter to win. I entered to test myself against current standards and see where I stood compared to today's shooters. The colonel looked up from the notebook. How did you perform? 3rd place overall, 2nd place in the precision category. Out of 47 competitors, including several active-duty military snipers and law enforcement specialists. Sarah's voice carried quiet pride, not boastfulness. More importantly, I learned that while my technical skills needed some refreshing, my ability to remain calm under pressure and make accurate shots when it counted was still intact. Colonel Martinez set the notebook on his desk and studied Sarah's face. He was beginning to see past the middle-aged civilian exterior to the experienced soldier beneath. But shooting competitions are controlled environments, he pointed out. Teaching requires a different set of skills. Can you transfer your knowledge to young soldiers who may have never held a rifle before? Sarah nodded, having expected this question as well. During my final year of active duty, I spent 4 months as an assistant instructor at the Army Marksmanship Unit. Teaching wasn't just something I did occasionally, it was a significant part of my responsibilities. She walked back to her chair and sat down, her posture confident but not arrogant. I discovered that I had a natural ability to break down complex concepts into understandable steps. Some soldiers learn by explanation, others by demonstration, and still others by repetition and gradual improvement. Good instruction requires reading each individual student and adapting your approach accordingly. The sound of footsteps in the hallway indicated that more applicants were arriving for their scheduled interviews. Sarah was aware that her time was running out, but she could see that Colonel Martinez was genuinely considering her qualifications. There's something else, Sarah said, reaching for the ammunition box one final time. Something I haven't shown you yet. She opened the box and withdrew a single sheet of paper that had been folded and placed at the bottom. The document was older than the others, and even more official-looking, bearing multiple signatures and an elaborate seal. What is this? The colonel asked, accepting the document. Sarah's expression grew serious. That's a commendation letter from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, recognizing exceptional service in a classified operation that I still can't discuss in detail. What I can tell you is that it involved a situation where standard procedures had failed, where multiple lives were at stake, and where success required not just exceptional shooting skills, but the ability to make critical decisions under extreme pressure. Colonel Martinez read the letter carefully. Even with the classified details redacted, the language was extraordinary. Words like exceptional valor, decisive action, and prevented catastrophic loss of life stood out from the official military prose. This operation took place during my 2nd deployment, Sarah explained. It's the reason I was fast-tracked for advanced instructor training, and it's the reason my service record was classified at such a high level. I'm not sharing this to impress you, Colonel, but to demonstrate that my experience goes beyond just technical proficiency. The colonel folded the document carefully and handed it back to Sarah. He had seen many service records during his career, but few that carried this level of official recognition for classified operations. Ms. Mitchell, I'm beginning to understand why you kept all of this hidden for so many years. This level of service carries a heavy burden. Sarah nodded, replacing the commendation letter in the ammunition box. It does, and that's exactly why I'm here now. I've spent 15 years trying to run from that burden, trying to be someone I'm not. But I've realized that experience, that weight, that knowledge, it's not just my past. It's my responsibility. She looked directly at the colonel. Those young soldiers training outside your window, they're going to face situations that I've already survived. They're going to need skills that I've already mastered. And some of them are going to die if they don't receive the best possible training. The office fell quiet again. Colonel Martinez walked to his window and looked out at the parade ground, where the afternoon training session was winding down. Young men and women in uniform were cleaning their equipment and preparing to return to barracks. "What makes you think you're ready to take on that responsibility again?" he asked without turning around. Sarah stood up, holding the ammunition box against her side. "Because I've finally learned the difference between running from responsibility and learning to carry it properly. I'm ready to stop hiding who I am and start using what I know to make a difference again." Colonel Martinez turned from the window and returned to his desk, where Sarah's certificates and documents were still spread out like pieces of a puzzle that was finally coming together. The afternoon light had shifted, casting different shadows across the room and highlighting the official seals and signatures that validated Sarah's extraordinary military background. "Ms. Mitchell, I've been conducting interviews for military positions for over 20 years, the colonel said, settling into his chair. "I've seen confident applicants with impressive resumes, and I've seen nervous candidates who exceeded all expectations. But I've never had someone walk into my office and completely redefine themselves in the space of one conversation." Sarah remained standing, the ammunition box still in her arms. She could sense that something important was happening, but she wasn't sure whether the colonel's surprise was working in her favor or against her. "I have to ask," Colonel Martinez continued, "why didn't you lead with these credentials? Why come in here with that old box and let people mock you when you could have presented yourself as one of the most qualified instructors available?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Through the glass wall, she could see that Sergeant Williams and several other applicants were still waiting, their patience clearly wearing thin as her interview continued well past its scheduled time. "Because I needed to know something about myself, Colonel. I needed to know if I could handle the doubt, the skepticism, the assumption that I didn't belong here. If I had walked in here with a polished presentation and perfect credentials, I would never have learned whether I had the courage to face the challenges that come with being different, being unexpected." She set the ammunition box down on the chair and faced the colonel directly. "Sir, if you hire me, I'm going to face those same doubts and assumptions every day from students, from other instructors, from everyone who sees a middle-aged woman and wonders what she could possibly teach them about combat. I needed to prove to myself that I could handle that pressure before I could ask you to trust me with your soldiers." Colonel Martinez nodded slowly, understanding the deeper wisdom in her approach. "And have you? Proved it to yourself?" "Yes, sir. The comments in the hallway, the looks in the waiting room, the assumption that I was lost or applying for the wrong job, I handled all of that without losing my composure or my confidence. That tells me I'm ready for whatever challenges this position might bring." The colonel picked up one of the certificates from his desk, studying it again. "These qualifications are remarkable, but they're also 15 years old. The military has changed significantly since your active duty days. New technologies, new tactics, new threats. How do you plan to address that gap?" Sarah had expected this concern and had given it considerable thought during her months of preparation. "You're absolutely right, Colonel. The fundamental principles of marksmanship remain the same, but everything else has evolved. That's actually one of the reasons I believe I can be effective in this role." She moved to stand beside the window, looking out at the modern training facilities and updated equipment visible on the base. "Students learn best from instructors who demonstrate continuous learning. If I came in here claiming to know everything about current tactics and technology, I would be lying, and good students would see through that immediately. Instead, I can offer them something different, the foundation of proven experience combined with the humility to learn alongside them." Sarah turned back to face the colonel. "I've spent the past 6 months not just refreshing my shooting skills, but studying current military doctrine, reading after-action reports from recent operations, and researching advances in optics, ammunition, and rifle systems. I'm not current yet, but I'm committed to becoming current." Colonel Martinez was impressed by the thoroughness of her preparation, but he had one more concern to address. "Ms. Mitchell, this position requires more than just instruction. You would be responsible for preparing soldiers for life and death situations, for making decisions that could save or cost lives. Are you prepared to carry that weight again? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah knew this was the heart of everything, not just whether she could teach marksmanship, but whether she could handle the responsibility of preparing young soldiers for combat. Colonel, I've been carrying that weight for 15 years, whether I acknowledged it or not. Every time I heard news about military operations, every time I saw young soldiers in uniform, every time I read about casualties in overseas conflicts, I wondered if better training might have made a difference. I wondered if my experience locked away in that ammunition box might have saved lives if I had chosen to share it, instead of hide from it. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. The weight of responsibility doesn't disappear when you leave the military. It follows you. The only question is whether you use that experience to make a positive difference or let it become a burden that serves no purpose. Colonel Martinez stood up and walked to a filing cabinet, retrieving a thick folder. I've reviewed the applications for this position very carefully. We've had 12 qualified candidates, including several with recent combat experience and current certifications. Sarah felt her stomach tighten, preparing for disappointment. But qualifications on paper only tell part of the story, the colonel continued, returning to his desk with the folder. What I'm looking for is someone who understands that training soldiers is about more than teaching them to shoot accurately. It's about developing their confidence, their decision-making ability, and their mental resilience under pressure. He opened the folder and pulled out a job description. The sniper instructor position requires someone who can teach technical skills, but also someone who can mentor young soldiers, help them understand the psychological aspects of precision shooting, and prepare them for the realities they'll face in combat situations. Sarah listened carefully, recognizing that the colonel was describing exactly the kind of comprehensive instruction she had received during her own advanced training. Based on our conversation today, Ms. Mitchell, I believe you understand those requirements better than any other candidate I've interviewed. Your experience is not just extensive, it's exactly the kind of real-world background that our soldiers need to learn from. The colonel stood up and extended his hand across the desk. If you're willing to accept the position, I'd like to offer you the job as senior sniper instructor, effective immediately. Sarah stared at his outstretched hand for a moment, hardly believing what she was hearing. After months of doubt, preparation, and hope, after enduring the skepticism and mockery, after opening herself up to judgment and possible rejection, she was being offered exactly what she had dreamed of. She reached out and shook Colonel Martinez's hand firmly. Thank you, Colonel. I accept. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the edge of the shooting range at Fort Henderson, watching her latest group of students practice long-range precision techniques. The morning sun cast long shadows across the range, and the crisp autumn air carried the sharp crack of rifle fire and the metallic ping of targets being hit at distances that had seemed impossible to these soldiers just weeks ago. Instructor Mitchell, called out Private Rodriguez, one of her most promising students. I'm consistently hitting the 800-yard target now, but I'm having trouble with the wind compensation calculations. Sarah walked over to where Rodriguez was positioned behind his rifle, the same weathered ammunition box now serving as her mobile instruction kit. The box had become something of a legend among the students, who had all heard the story of how their unassuming instructor had shocked Colonel Martinez and earned her position. Show me your setup, Sarah said, kneeling beside the young soldier. She watched as he adjusted his scope and checked his breathing, noting the small improvements he had made since their last session. Rodriguez took his shot, and they both watched through binoculars as the bullet struck the target just slightly left of center. Close but not perfect, he said with frustration. Close is progress, Sarah replied calmly. 6 weeks ago, you couldn't hit that target at all. Today, you're within 2 inches of center at 800 yards. That's exceptional improvement. She pulled out her